LTD has created this language that no one else can understand. Like, no one can access that language. And we've used it because we feel that we don't belong. So we've created an entire lexicon that the only people that can understand it are people that work in learning and talent development. And we think that is going to really help make us sound better, or that we are really clever, or it's really inaccessible. And I think these two things go hand in hand. We have ostracized ourselves from the people that we serve by using a language they don't understand. Because they don't understand that, they have just got used to saying, well, I just want this. And we go, great, I will go and do that, and I will build it or create it or whatever that is, and I will hand it back to you because you will say thank you and you'll tell me I did a great job and I've got a job for another year. I genuinely think we've talked ourselves as a profession out of a seat at the table because we've just built this transactional relationship with the people that we are there to serve. And all of the super intelligent people that work in this arena and know so much and could do so much more can't, because as a function, it is just built purely on attempting to get validation from the business.
Michael, it's really great to have you today. I'm super excited to dive into the wealth of your experience you have being a very strategic R&D professional. And thanks for joining to share your wisdom.
Absolutely my pleasure, Vince. Thank you for having me. More for you.
Yeah, well, when we chatted last time, we talked a lot about the age-old problem of L&D does not have a seat at the table. And I think you have thought a lot about this. And so I want to dive into maybe the problem first. I guess the question I would ask is, why do you think this is happening, and why is it so persistent year over year, despite everyone talking about it all the time?
And you're right. It is this perpetual problem that just goes round and round every year. I spend a lot of time with other L&D professionals or whatever branding everyone's given themselves this year. For me, there's 2 or 3 things, and all of them are perfectly valid. I think one of them is, when we look at it in the big picture, learning and development at the start of a year on January 1st, it's a cost to the business, to everyone. So that's that starting point. L&D as a profession seems to need to have that validation from the business. The business, in whatever profession it is focused on their delivery. And specifically for me, it is client delivery. Our business is focused purely on client delivery. So they come to learning and talent development, L&D, and just say, and just ask for stuff. I want this, I want that. I've seen this. I have diagnosed it. This is the thing that I want. Our profession gets its validation from delivering that thing. I was asked for this. I delivered this. I'm told, well done. I get a lovely pat on the back, whatever that may be, because we are obsessed with delivering the thing, the packet, the package, the thing, because that's what the business has asked for. And so we go round over and over again. The business gives us our validation. And then there's a few folks that will then take that product and they will put that product or that packet in for an award. And because it's an award that awards packets, they get a gold certificate or a silver one or a bronze one, and they're told they're really great. And we just go round on this validation cycle. And then to make ourselves sound intelligent, or to give ourselves a higher standing, L&D has created this language that no one else can understand. Like, no one can access that language. And we've used it because we feel that we don't belong. So we've created an entire lexicon that the only people that can understand it are people that work in learning and talent development. And we think that is going to really help make us sound better, or that we are really clever, or it's really inaccessible. And I think these two things go hand in hand. We have ostracized ourselves from the people that we serve by using a language they don't understand. And because they don't understand that, they have just got used to saying, well, I just want this. And we go, great, I will go and do that, and I will build it or create it or whatever that is, and I will hand it back to you because you will say thank you and you'll tell me I did a great job and I've got a job for another year. I genuinely think we've talked ourselves as a profession out of a seat at the table, because we've just built this transactional relationship with the people that we are there to serve. And all of the super intelligent people that work in this arena and know so much and could do so much more can't, because as a function, it is just built purely on attempting to get validation from the business.
That's a really interesting framing, like sort of the driven by validation. I think what that reminds me is I remember chatting with some of the L&D leaders at a conference, and one of the things we talked about is people who are drawn to L&D are people who naturally like to be helpful. Like it's like, you know, it kind of pulls on, like, people are generally not very combative, right? Because if you're into like helping other people and like helping other people grow, you're like an empathetic person. Like you have a bit of a people pleasing tendency that like probably, you know, grew up with oftentimes. The behavior of pushing back, being a like sparring partner and like debating is like maybe less comfortable also.
Yeah.
And that contributes to it.
In our firm, we have a high number of worker persisters who are just driven towards that end goal. And a lot of people that work in L&TD and these sort of people arenas tend to be harmonizers, dreamers, you know, and don't have as much of that combativeness, which actually, when you reframe it, is just consulting. It's just being curious. It's just
really consulting. Yeah. It's definitely like being a trusted advisor in consulting, right? Which, by the way, but it's not a skill that's like very natural for people to learn, right? I feel like even, you know, as a former consultant, you have to go through multiple years of being in consulting and being apprenticed by senior partners and so on for you to learn, okay, this is how you tactfully take what people say and like reframe it back and go back and forth. And it's not actually just even just a skill. It's like, I feel like in consulting, a lot of young people who come into the profession initially don't have the confidence. I feel like, well, I'm an imposter. I don't know anything about this industry, and I'm supposed to consult these senior folks. So you're fighting this imposter syndrome, and so you have to get to a point where you're like, actually, I'm pretty good at my job, and I have to write.
Point that is.
Right. But like that takes time, right? You have to like embrace a new professional identity. And I feel like a lot of L&D folks also don't have as many at-bat opportunities to build those, neither the skills nor the confidence to then be a real sparring partner to business.
True. Yeah, I agree. And I think it takes a lot to build that in. You know, easy for us to sit here with the amount of time and reps that we've put in. You know, it's easy for us to sort of sit here and say, it's easy. One thing, especially having worked a lot in the past few years with early career talent in consulting, is the one thing I think the most applicable across any interaction with our business is curiosity. Is just simply taking an interest in what the business is doing. What cycle are we in? Are we in a holding cycle, a growth cycle? You know, what cycles are we in? Where do we want to be in the market? What's our different strategy? And the people strategy should always align to the outward facing business strategy. I don't see enough of that interaction at those levels. Again, is it because people don't want to seem stupid? Is it because they assumed they already know? But why don't we just start off with that curiosity? Same with the transactional pizza order. You know, the business says, I've identified a problem over here and this is the thing that I want because I know that's the thing that's going to solve it. And rather than just taking that pizza order and going, right, okay, I'll go and get my validation in 3 months' time and I'll give you when I give you the thing. It's just understanding where that came from and understanding the stories that surround that. And I don't think having a million reps at something or having a background in consultancy is the absolute precursor for that. I just think asking questions, being curious around what has generated that need is the ultimate starting point. And I think anyone can do.
I feel like for L&D to really be a good thought partner to the business, I think you need to be able to like share right way to solve problems that they probably don't know about. So, you know, one is be curious about what is the thing you're trying to solve, but then actually guide them towards, no, that's like not the right way to solve it. The right way to solve like is this. Actually, most of the time, training is not even the solution. It's like something different. But I feel like somehow there is like a large sort of group of L&D teams that are accustomed to being like, okay, I just like develop e-learning. Like they define their identity by the modality that they work on.
Yep.
And that's difficult because then if someone asks you for something, you will naturally just go towards the thing that instead of like, you know, thinking through what's in my toolkit. So I'm curious what you think about sort of that situation. And maybe that's just a difficult problem because there's so many different modalities. And so L&D people, it's hard for one to be good at everything.
I'll start off by saying, and if that's what you love doing, that's okay. Right? Like not everyone wants to get into the beating heart of their business. Some people are just really good e-learning designers and just want to design really good e-learning because let's face it, at some point, all of us have to do some e-learning at some point. and we'd rather it be entertaining than being a race to the end. So hats off to the great e-learning designers that have kept me entertained. And on top of that, I think it is difficult to break that mold. And it is difficult if you've been, you delivered one good thing. But I think that's your leverage point. If someone has come to you and they have respected you enough and they liked the product that you built, that is your platform to build outside of that. And that's your opportunity to get people to think differently. And influence isn't granted. You don't just, it's not something you're given. It's something that you architect, something that you earn, but you architect at the same time. And it's using whatever platform you have to launch off the top of that. It's a simple conversation, especially if someone says, you're the e-learning person, I want some more e-learning. It's like, well, what is the problem? Because that great e-learning that I built you, the reason why it was successful was because it was the correct answer to the question. And that's why I did it. But actually, what you're now asking needs a different answer. And that different answer involves me asking more questions. Just that one pivot moment. Maybe I'm lucky, but in, showing my age, nearly 20 years of doing this, very rarely have I had an interaction where someone's just gone, no, 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 just do that. Most people actually want to be heard. And even if they just want to tell you more details about the great idea they've had that is probably wrong, what they do want to actually understand is your process.
Right.
And
Yeah.
by you understanding their process then gives them the permission to then explore yours outside of the thing that they knew you for, because people don't want to be wrong and they certainly don't want to put you in a box. Well, what they do want is the answer. It just so happens if you gave them a really good answer 6 months ago with an e-learning packet, they now think that's the answer. And that's fine because they don't do your job. And I think that's the other thing. We assume a lot of the time that the people we're talking to just assume that we're like, we don't belong. We're actually, they're coming to you for your expertise. If they come to you and ask for something, they're coming to you because you can do something they can't. And that's again the door that's open for you to then continue on doing that. We make that choice whether to have a transactional relationship or not at any given moment.
Fully agree with that. I actually wanted to dive into this framework you recently shared with me that you've created to just help people think about winning the seat at the table, and conveniently named, I think it was SEATs. S-E-A-T-S.
Creativity is my strong point, Vince.
Well, memorability is key, and this was really easy to remember. Could you maybe first of all start with a quick description of like what is SEATs? Like what are the different each of the letters, and then what really motivated you to try to create it? And then like afterwards we can maybe dive into pieces of that.
Sure. So first of all, my memory's shocking. So I needed something that reminded me about the process to go through. It was born out of a little bit of frustration, is that, LNTD has so many different models, and I just needed something that sat in my head that moved away from trying to sound clever in a learning and talent development world and actually speak a language that my business understood, which was, we'll start with the tippy top, S. I just wanted to learn how to spot opportunities and the people that I work with to spot those opportunities and not take things at face value. Every conversation was the opportunity. And I think we touched on it slightly earlier about the E comes about earning credibility and having that opportunity. It doesn't matter if the last interaction you had was about the thing you're trying to move away from. They've come back to you because you delivered. So you've got credibility. But how do you earn further credibility in the direction you want to go toward? Third one, I was struggling here a little bit, Vince. So I was architect for impact with the A. I'm a big fan of this, the idea of architecture. I say this a lot, much to the chagrin of some of my colleagues. My best days are when I'm not building anything. My best days are when I'm designing solutions and I'm really thinking about, and you touched on it earlier, which makes my heart sink, which was we're thinking about the whole infrastructure that sits around. Most of the answers aren't just training. It's not a thing. There's a whole host of things that sit around it. You just have better conversations when you're talking about architecture. But more importantly, it's about how do I get to that impact? So it's making sure anything that I architect has got impact in mind. T, there was too many S's, so thankfully I managed to get the T in, which was tell the story. How do we make our impact visible? I see so many slides that for me, I call it housekeeping and get told off. No one is going to give you the credibility in the seat if your story is just based around, these are the learning hours, these are the bums in seats, this is the results of the happy sheet. There's no story. There's no beginning, middle, or end. There was no, well, it started here. This is how we got through. This is the impact that we're having. This is what you should be seeing. How do we tell the story? And we talk about this a lot in our wider firm about the power of storytelling. And I think L&TD, as a people-orientated business, has so many great people stories to tell, and we bury them underneath quite inane data that is quite old. I get the pushback a lot of, but that's what the business want. If the business had only ever eaten dry toast, the business would want dry toast. If you introduce jam to that toast, they will want the jam on the toast. We have to be a little bit bolder in some of the things we offer up. That's not to say we get rid of that, but I think that's just almost like a ticker in the corner. Like, the hours just tick up over the course of a year, and we have that. How many programs we ran and how many bums on seats, and we do all of that. But that is 30-second jargon before we start telling the core stories. And then sustain. How do we keep our place at the table? And that is all of those things over and over again. The minute we rest on our laurels, the minute that we go back and just give them the thing, or we just go and take the next request, or we start defending our existing programs, it's an ego thing. I have been lucky enough to build some really great and architects and fantastic solutions for different firms. And at no point have I ever thought that they are bulletproof. Things just change, things evolve, the business cycle changes. And I just think we have to be prepared to maneuver in that. And sustaining that seat is staying as close as possible to the business priorities and constantly going through that cycle with them, of asking them, retesting what's changed, what's this group of people now doing, what do they need next. So I think it's always looking towards the future, and that's how you sustain this thing. And that's how we came up with S.E.A.T.S, Vince.
I like it. I mean, it's very tight and memorable, and it really resonates a lot. When you look at L&D teams you've worked with or talked to, either within AlixPartners or beyond, I'm curious, which part of S.E.A.T.S do you think is most often like the biggest problem?
I think each one becomes the biggest problem once you've done really well at the first.
Right, so it's a bottleneck. Like you first solve the first thing, and then the second one is a problem. Is that what you're saying?
100%. Like spotting the opportunity. If you're not going to spot the opportunity, you're never going to get anywhere near E.A.T or S, right? But I've experienced a lot of the mediocre, and hands up, I have also done a lot of the mediocre. I've reacted to training requests. I've started designing or rushed to a solution without understanding the problem. Like I've done all of that. Right. So I didn't see the opportunity beyond the ask. And I think that bottleneck is us pausing, getting curious. Pause, get curious, ask questions around the problem. Like they might be, whoever's requested something might be 100% right. That solution that they want might be the exact thing. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't be curious around it. I would say 99 times out of 100, what they've actually asked for isn't right. And that's fine. They're not the professionals in that. They're just trying to solve a problem. And I think one of my colleagues is probably better at this in terms of how he describes it. So I'm going to pinch it. Sorry, Sam. Fall in love with the problem. Like literally fall in love with it. Fall in love with solving problems, solving challenges. That's where the opportunities exist. And I think that is the first bottleneck. Using language that stops us or alienates us. Just ask, like, what's coming up in the business? What's made this come up now? Have you seen anyone doing this well? Basic questions like that just open so many doors for people, and then gives you a chance to then mess up how we win credibility, where you start talking about engagement scores and attendance, and you've got all this passion and no precision. Simple answer is each one is difficult, and you just need to start with the S and go through. But just bear in mind that sometimes you're just going to have to reset.
I mean, on that, maybe we can go like one by one, and I'd be curious. Like, there's some of these things I have like some hunch on what I see that where people are trying to do it, but I think it doesn't play out quite the way. And I'd be curious to get your thoughts on those. For example, on Spot the Opportunity, one thing I have noticed is there's kind of a version of this that becomes very bureaucratic, which is like needs analysis, but in like a very like overly structured sense that actually what it actually does is like something that should take you like 3 days just to talk with a few stakeholders and very quickly get to like a reasonable 80-20 answer becomes like a 3-month exercise. And then the business is like, we've already moved on. Like you are not responding to our need, right? I see like this like really lengthened needs analysis a lot. Sometimes it's required, but like for most problems really do not need a 3-month needs analysis. You can talk to like 3 SMEs and team members, and you like pretty much sort of get a sense for what's going to drive the 80% impact. How do you avoid spotting the opportunity devolving into this very theoretical academic exercise of needs analysis?
For me, was making that exact mistake, is over engineering that part of understanding the problem. I think some of it, unfortunately, is pattern recognition. You hear certain issues and you've got pattern recognition after 15, 20 years of doing this, and you go, okay, and you can already start filtering. I think it just depends like how that problem that you're asking that question, why are you asking for this? And just digging that little bit deeper, just in that initial conversation to try and simplify it. I just ask, who else should I speak to? Who's doing this well? Who's someone that you know isn't doing this well? Who else should I speak to? And I try and keep that group relatively tight. I think it's also understanding how far is this going to go? If you're going to design or architect, more importantly, something that is going to affect 3,000 people, you might want to go deep and you might want to spend a little bit of time. If this is for a certain pocket of the business that you serve and it's going to serve 20, 30, 40 people, whatever it may be, or two, understanding the problem and ultimately the solutions, I think then become to dictate. I can ask someone and they think they need a piece of it. Let's use e-learning. Let's pick on e-learning for the rest of the day, Vince. I'm up for it. Right. Someone comes in and says, I want a piece of e-learning. And I'm like, well, what's the problem? Well, what's going on? Oh, they're not doing X, Y, and Z. Who does this really well? They do. Is the solution not just to put those two people together? And sometimes you can come up with that super speedy solution straight away, which I think then gives you the leverage of going deeper and going through that discovery. And I prefer to look at it as discovery because it is just a bunch of conversations and making notes and then finding the pattern. And sometimes you can speak to 3 people and find the pattern. And sometimes you need to speak to 20 before you really understand the problem. I personally believe the closer you get to the people you serve, the faster any form of needs analysis becomes. And you build those reps of just getting a little bit. You just become better at it. But the practice is get it wrong a couple of times. But also, it's probably useful to go a little bit longer, but not bury yourself in learning and talent development bureaucracy. Just go and be curious around the problem and just focus on the problem rather than, when you said needs analysis, in my head, I'd got the TAP checklist suddenly popped into my head from 15 years ago. And I'm like, don't do that bit.
I agree with that. And like to your point, like a lot of it's around judgment, pattern recognition, but also just recognizing there's an opportunity cost of you spending a lot of time on this versus other problems to be solving. So not everything requires like 100% solution. I think most of the time actually in business, you want to get to an 80% solution with 20% effort and like move on and solve a different problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, spot on.
Yeah. In terms of like earning credibility, I think this is somewhat tight. I think also, I think, in telling the story and so on. But I often find L&D teams like struggling to tell a concrete impact-oriented case when the nature of the business often is quite soft. And unless you're doing L&D in a very particular field, like sales or something, where the literal outcome is very tied to dollars, it's kind of difficult. Like I see a lot of teams trying to like make this work, but actually they do it in a way that it actually is not even convincing because you're now like artificially tying numbers. And even if you present numbers to CFOs, like they don't believe this. Like this causal link is too far-fetched, right? So I'm curious like how you think about what are some really good outcomes and performance and impact that typically land with key stakeholders and proves that you're doing good work, but also not over-engineers, again, like a metric that doesn't really make sense.
It's a great show. Yeah, it's the curse of ROI, right? Everyone wanting to get to the top of that pyramid as fast as possible and ignore the fact that there's 1,000 other things that affected that ROI, which makes the number unbelievable. I'm sure I'm saying this to get shot down by anyone that's listening. So I simplified it as much as possible. And I sit with my business or my individual or my stakeholders, and whether it's in a design sprint or it's in a conversation like we're having now, and I try and pin them down to stuff. What am I going to see different? What are the leading indicators that I'm going to see? What am I going to start experiencing? And what business results should I see differently? Classic examples, presentation skills, right? We all remember the presentation skills deck, and it tells you you'll speak with more clarity and confidence. You'll be able to use hand gestures. The business don't care about that. And I'm like, if this person went on presentation skills, what are you going to see differently? And they're going to tell me what they're going to see. The leading indicators are going to be these. But actually, in terms of business results, I should be able to leave them who can talk to a mid-level client and walk them through our 4-page review deck of this week's work, get signed off so we can start the next work package on Monday. That's where I need them to be. Now, all of the other things that are in that presentation skills deck, speaking with clarity, with purpose, all of that is needed, but it's not what the business is looking for. And I think even just on that really simple level, understanding what the business hopes to see or would expect to see or wants to see and being able to deliver to that is going to make a huge difference. Because again, that comes back to telling your story. When we first sat down, these were our golden aims. People talk to me all the time about, especially at senior level, they just need more time. And I'm like, well, I can't give you more time, but if you walk me through a day in the life of one of our early career staff and what they're doing and where your time is being used on stuff that it doesn't need to be. A lot of it correcting slide decks, etc. And I'm like, right, great. Now give me a measurement. On average, how good is a slide deck from someone who just walks into the firm? They're like 10% good. And I'm like, how long does it take to correct? They'll be like 4 hours. When do you do that? In the hotel between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And I'm like, right, what if I could get it 60% good? And they're like, well, that'd probably save me 2-3 hours a night. And I'm like, is that a good thing? They're like, yeah, exactly. And already they're beginning to emotionally attach to what we're going to do. It's like, right, if you give me these people for X amount of time, don't worry about it. It's almost don't worry about what I'm going to do, because my only aim is to improve their slides from 10% to 60%. As a really simple metaphor for what we're trying to do. And I think that idea of working with the business and just beginning to understand what they're going to see and the indicators. And a lot of it will just be, well, actually, if you can get them doing this, and then the byproduct is they'll get staffed more, which means that they will return more money for the firm. And then you've got a little bit of a stake, credibly, because the business starts talking about that. Well, actually, because I did this, this, and this, they were able to bill more. So credibly, the stake and the, I don't know, I guess the reference goes to the learning and talent development team. You might get a little slice of that pie, which then obviously is quite good, because as a cost to the business, you can start negating that off the top. So yeah, that's what I believe. Leading indicators, business results, and don't tell them what they're going to see. Get them to tell you what they expect to see. And then you have that conversation around whether that is logical or not.
Yeah, I really like the painting, the different way in which the movie's going to play out, and get them to really think about that. I really like that as a way to get people to like buy into it. On Architect for Impact, I think this is the one where we sort of touched a little bit. I actually think there are so many different modalities in which learning and enablement can happen. And I think it's one of the things where it's actually conceptually difficult for one person to be good at e-learning and live facilitation and like building an AI performance coach and, you know, like a PDF and like a SharePoint and whatever and whatever. It's like, it becomes like quite a difficult endeavor, right? When you think about architecting for impact, what is the thing that someone who's very good at that, like what do they do in order to be able to do that very effectively? Both at the thinking stage, but also in the execution stage. Because if you're going to propose something, you better be able to execute it. Because businesses won't be like, okay, well, you have a great solution, but you have no idea how to do it. That's not great either.
I think first of all, they accept that any version they build or architect or anything that is architected isn't going to be perfect first time. To your point, they get the right people in the room. They don't go off and try and teach themselves something. They don't shy away from things they can't do. They just flip everything to how might we. If you know that you've got 8 or 9 things that are going to make this brilliant and you're good at 2 of them, how might we make the other 7 great? And it's normally personnel and expertise. And you bring those expertise to the party. I think don't, go and search for it. Prototype early, where we are big proponents of, lo-fi prototype. Let's not walk down a road too far when we know it might not work. So let's just prototype it and lo-fi it. If suddenly you've got a big event that you're going to build with Lego, don't go and buy all the Lego. Just throw some lollipop sticks in the middle of a table with some sellotape and see if the concept works. Lo-fi everything. And I think those that I see that do it really well simply start with the thing they're looking to change. What is it that at a minimum that we need to change? I sit in rooms and they're like, well, can you put some bells and whistles on? I'm like, nope. We're just going to architect the thing that works. and we're going to test it. And we're not going to launch anything at scale until we know. And any blocker we have, we're going to reframe and understand what expertise do we need in the room to make this work. And if we can't get that expertise, what have we done wrong? Let's not walk too far down before we need to row back. And I think where it goes wrong is probably easier, right? People start with content, all the design's done up front, and everything's treated like a big event. The amount of times I hear about a rollout plan because the content's already done and no one's really sat around and thought about what's the change that we're really trying to enact. And I think it's the best I've heard is when people really start talking about what's the smallest thing we can do that makes the boat go faster. What's the smallest thing that's going to move the needle?
I feel like this is similarly to like spot the opportunity, like being 80/20 is super key. But from what you're saying, I suspect this is where I think it's an underutilized use case of AI, but I think AI should be able to help a bunch here because you're now able to prototype stuff that before you probably said, I can't. Like, I don't really have the ability to do this. Like, for example, you can create videos like with just clicks. You can create like, workshop plans with just a click, probably create e-learning courses like a prototype with just a few prompts. And there's a whole bunch of things you can do to bring your things to life in different formats that before might have really required someone to be like really good at articulate or have a studio and like record. I feel like this is where a really excellent learning design professional will become like the ultimate Swiss Army knife person who can do early prototyping, and only when it comes to scale then you can really invest in bringing someone who's expert and specialist to come in and build something higher grade.
I think that's a great show. We've used it a lot. We have certainly experimented with it as a thought partner, as a stress test, specifically before we get in front of business. If they're not in the room designing with us, and let's face it, not every piece of architecture requires lots of people in a room working. A lot of it is done like this or in isolation. So I think AI in terms of, look, what does this look like? You put a bunch of stuff in and it spits it out. It appeals to my sensibility to lo-fi vids.
Yeah, I love that. Going down the framework on telling the story, I would love to hear your thoughts on one is like the story itself, like the sort of the content. But then there's a piece of like who is there with you telling the story so that like the story has the credibility. Like it's the business counterpart, the senior leader that's like out there validating the story that you have and really amplifying it for you. Like where do you tell the story? In what format? I think all kind of ladder up to this thing landing versus this thing being like, oh, HR is like saying this thing, but like I'm sort of not sure if that's true or not. So I'm curious, like what are the elements of a truly effective storytelling that you've seen in organizations?
That's a nice curveball, and I 100% agree. And I was just reflecting as you said that, and I've been really lucky in that I've had some really good sponsors of the work that we do. I would go one further to say, actually, now I've said that, is that understanding your hierarchy for whatever project you've embarked on is super important. Who are your working groups? Who's your first sign off? Who's your steering committee? But who's your sponsor? Who's the person that this rolls up to? Who's the one that signs this off? Who's the one that gives you that information? And it doesn't necessarily have to be this big hierarchical thing where you need a super senior person. You just need the person that's going to sign, well, what we would call in the old days, sign the check. Who signs off on this and says, great, this is what I asked for. We've done the work. And this is going to make the deal. And I think that's really important, is having that clear, because if not, a lot of times it feels like learning is being done to us. It's been designed in a corner. We haven't been consulted on it. It's now been pushed down. It's something that we just have to get through. Or even worse, it turns out to be really great. And then you've got a myriad of people that want their sort of little bit of sunshine off the side of it. And then you've got a kaleidoscope of folks, I would say, taking credit. I don't think it's necessarily that, I think, but want to be involved because it's something that has worked well. And again, all of that gets muddied. So I think, first of all, understanding, who's your champion? Who's the person you're really, like the people you're designing for, but who's the person that's going to amplify your message is really important. And it tends to be because you're helping them solve a business problem. You are solving a problem using the language the business understands. So actually translating the outcome is pretty easy because you're just using the business language. You just need to give them the hook that they remember. I'm sure people get wound up because I say a lot of the things a lot of the time over and over again. But I think that repetition, repeating narrative over and over again. And I don't think it's I made the business 100 grand over and over again. I think it's talking about the process, the engagement, what happened. And actually, like, people want to be involved. The amount of people that engage with learning and talent development is, I think, a direct correlator with how well you tell your stories. Because people that haven't worked with LTD, when they hear these stories, are like, actually, I've got a huge amount of experience and a huge amount of knowledge that I want to pass on to the next generation, or I want to share. And I think AI is a really big thing at the moment. You've got people that know what they're talking about, but translating that knowledge to lots of people is proving a real challenge for a lot of people. And I think the more we tell our stories, the more people want to engage and are actually far more flexible than we think they ever will.
Interesting. Sort of the final piece, you said sustain, right? And really stay nimble as the businesses change. I think agility, I mean, like, not just L&D, like anywhere. I think
Uh-huh.
agility is like extremely critical now. Very few organizations are capable of learning and adapting at the pace in which the world is moving. I think everyone's trying to keep up. What have you seen that actually helps like the L&D teams actually move fast and almost faster than business? Because oftentimes I feel L&D is like lagging and business does feels like L&D is always like too slow to react. What speeds that up?
For me, it's staying as close as possible to the friends that you make in the business. The business goes through cycles. Business will go through planning. They will talk about the firm and what the firm does far more than you ever will. They will talk about it hourly, daily, weekly. We only ever really get snapshots. I think the closer we can get to our businesses and the more interactions that we can have, and actually just taking an interest, right? Read, like, the amount of different subscriptions that I have now that are related to my firm's world of work. I would have never have had that 10 years ago. Like, I just wouldn't. I'd have sat in my bubble and done what I did in my bubble. Whereas now I spend a lot more time thinking about the wider ecosystem that my firm operates in. And I think having that is important rather than just thinking about the impact that AI is having on L&TD. I think about the impact that AI, for instance, is having in certain sectors, wherever that may be. Supply chain is a really good example of that. And I think how we go faster, don't think that rerunning last year's solutions is the answer. That's actually probably long term going to slow us down. I think we waste too much time defending the existing things that we've done for fear of looking like it failed. Even though it was probably awesome for 2-3 years, it's okay to retire.
And it might have been the right thing to do at that time, right?
Oh,
Like,
100%, right? It was the right thing to do. And what got us there was perfect. But what got us here
right,
may well not get us to where we need to be.
right,
And I
right.
think having that knowledge of that's okay. If something doesn't work now, but it worked then, doesn't mean it's failed. It worked then. Use everything that you've learned. And actually, you should be able to build off the back of that. Not necessarily what you built or you architected, but the principles that you've put in place. Things naturally become faster. Just retire stuff. When it's done, retire it. Ask those questions. Is it still solving the right problem? What changed? What's now changed since this was designed? And I think it's just being critical of our own work and getting ahead of that and not waiting for the business to tell us it's not working. We should already know. And we should be testing that assumption with our stakeholders, not waiting for our stakeholders to come to us. And I think that's the trick of staying ahead of the curve, is actually just anticipating things burn out, things need retiring, the world changes. And I don't expect everyone to suddenly go out and look at their business from a massively wider perspective. But I think understanding pressures that the people we serve are under and the environment they're operating in is a very valuable tool for us and how we respond to that.
Yeah. I just love this like metaphor and imagery of like not being on the defensive of the past, but being more on the offensive of figuring out what the problem is and actually really thinking about how to reinvent yourself constantly. Like that, I think is a good kind of a general theme, like that cuts across like all of the entire framework. So I love that. Any like last piece of advice for people who are facing budget cuts, existential questions about the need and role of L&D in an organization today, things they can tactically do with business counterparts or senior leaders to really transition from being the nice to have function to being someone the organization thinks, hey, we really, really need L&D because it's the only way we build competitive people advantage?
For me, The light bulb moment was when I started seeing my role as a cost to the business on the 1st of January every year. I start off knowing that my salary, bonus, like the budget that we have to create an architect, all of that is a negative on the balance sheet on January 1st. And my only aim is to pull that from a red number to a black number, like in whatever way I possibly can, and in whichever way the business wants to view that. The difference between mediocre, being a mediocre team, or a transactional team, and an excellent one that does those things, right? That learns how to do more with less. It's not intent, it's curiosity. Especially right when budgets are being cut and people are under pressure, the desire to be heard is higher. We
For sure.
should be listening to people.
Mm.
We should be asking them questions, because actually when you're in that transactional relationship and you're taking requests, that transactional relationship is, well, if I stopped asking you for things, what do you do? And I think that's where the question mark comes. That's where you can just start slicing budget. It's like, well, if our people just stop asking you for stuff, then you won't have to build anything, then you won't spend any money. And I think if it's the opposite way around and you stop treating requests as some form of instruction, and you just treat them as a hypothesis, right? An idea. You then start building business solutions. You start architecting for solution. And I think that is the biggest shift that people can have. And it doesn't solve everything, but it changes the dynamic of the original conversation. I don't think I've ever had anyone not want to answer the question, like ever. They're surprised sometimes, but I don't think I've ever met anyone when I've asked them, well, why is that? And they've started talking. No one's ever said, don't ask me that, just do it. They've
Yeah.
always answered the question. And I think it's a perfect way to start. And it's the way that we're going to, build relationships. It helps us talk to businesses and the people we have in, the people we serve in the language they understand, rather than sitting in that corner you described, just busy doing things. Because that transactional nature is the thing that, and that validation piece is the thing that our industry thrives on. Breaking that habit is the first step.
I just love that, and like for multiple reasons. I think generally, first of all, that mindset of at the beginning of the year, I'm a negative, is an interesting way to like
It's a brutal way.
not be complacent, but have a sense of urgency in like solving the right problem. But secondly, I think to your point, like you might still get a lot of validation from individual business leaders on people who went through your program. The people who are making the decision on whether L&D stays or not in your organization is a few levels higher. If you're just like happy with those validation, but you're not thinking about how is the business looking at my contribution, then you're still at risk, right? So I really like the framing that gets people to really objectively think about, am I adding what value in the organization? At what point am I now seen as completely indispensable? This was great. Michael, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and hopefully it's sort of more.
Look forward to speaking to you again anytime, Vince. Have a good one. Thank you very much.
You too.